This is Friday, March the 5th. This is American history. Well, by 1930, Americans are disappointed with Hoover. They are disappointed that he and the Republican Party are not doing anything, or at least they perceive he is not doing anything to end the Great Depression. The Republican Party is going to pass a measure in Congress that will lower taxes. But so many people are out of work, they don't pay taxes anyway. Unions are going to agree to work for less money so that more of their workers can keep their jobs. The Republicans are going to propose massive public works projects. Now, the biggest project will be on the Colorado River at what is today called Hoover Dam. Now, Hoover Dam is just outside of present-day Las Vegas, and it was built in an attempt to give thousands of men a job. Whether you work on the dam, or you work bringing the materials to the dam, or you're in the villages that were created for the dam workers. But none of this seemed to do any good, and the Democrats took control of Congress in 1930. Hoover feared that the Democrats would take control of all branches of government by 1932. So Hoover proposed the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. Now, it's simply called the RFC. Now, if you have to use this in your essay, the first time you have to call it Reconstruction Finance Corporation, and then after that you can call it the RFC. The RFC is going to take government money and loan it to business. So let's say that you are a business and you are having difficulty. The government will loan money to you. Now, you are supposed to take that money and you are supposed to reopen the factory. You are supposed to go out and hire the workers that you had laid off, and when these workers get their paycheck, they will then go out and buy things. Well, the RFC was one great big disappointment. Businesses borrowed the money, but they used the money to pay off debts. If they did hire workers, the workers will receive the money, and the workers will use it to pay off debts. Again, the idea is that the workers or the business had to go out and buy something new. Economists today call this the trickle-down theory. Now, the idea is that money will be given to the top of the business, and then the money will trickle down to the workers. Now, the money is supposed to go out in all directions, but as it usually worked out, the money is going to go to those who need it the least, the people who had loaned money to the business owners. Many states are going to call on Hoover to give direct aid to people. Hoover refused. Now, Hoover believed in what is called private organizations to give relief. So, church organizations, or private organizations, or even some states will give out direct assistance. Now, one of the states that gave out assistance is New York. Now, New York is the most populous state in the Union. And in 1928, they had elected Franklin Roosevelt as their governor. Franklin Roosevelt is going to give money to charitable organizations. And then these charitable organizations will give money to the poor. There were many people who thought what Franklin was doing was the way the country should go. Hoover disagreed. Americans became frustrated. They were out of work. They had no money. They were being evicted from their homes, and it seemed like the federal government was doing nothing. At the conclusion of World War I, Congress had met and had proposed a bonus for veterans of World War I. Now, this money was put away, and when they got to 1940, this money would be withdrawn and given to the veterans of World War I. Well, many veterans said they needed the bonuses and they needed it now. That without this money, their children were going to starve. In Oregon, a group of veterans are going to host a parade. And in this parade, they say they're going to drive to Washington, D.C. and demand their money. Well, sure enough, this parade of cars went to Washington. And each day, it was talked about on the radio, it was written about in the newspapers, and more veterans joined in. By May of 1932, over 20,000 marchers are going to descend upon Washington, D.C. Now, outside of what is today the Pentagon, they are going to build a city of shacks. Now, they're going to call these shacks Hoovervilles. And there they're going to then walk across the Anacostia Bridge, and they're going to march around the Capitol, and they say that they're going to stay there each day until they get their bonuses. Now, the Capitol is going to ask the Washington, D.C. police to disperse the marchers. And the leader of the D.C. police, who is a World War I veteran, says no. He will not do this, and he resigns. President Hoover and Congress are going to call upon the United States Army to disperse the marchers. Now, the person in charge of the United States Army is Douglas MacArthur. This is the son of the Philippine commander, Arthur MacArthur. Douglas MacArthur is going to send in tanks and soldiers with tear gas. The soldiers will be moved away. The shanties will be burned to the ground. Here is how the newsreels covered it in 1932. Soon, Americans began to build these Hoovervilles. Hooverville is a group of shacks. They're usually built on the outskirts of town. And here people who have been evicted from their homes or their apartments will make their living. They're very poorly constructed, but it's better than staying out in the open. Now, some had no place to go. They couldn't build a Hooverville, so they simply laid on the ground or they laid on park benches. They took old newspapers and put them over their body to try to keep in the warmth. These newspapers became known as Hoover blankets. Hoover flags turned out to be pockets of your pants turned inside out. Now, more troubling, banks were beginning to close at an alarming rate. Now, in those days, there was no guarantee of your money. And when the banks closed, you lost every single dime you had. Though these bank closings would create what are called run on the banks. Let's say that you have heard from a friend who has heard from a friend that this particular bank, which you have your money in, is going to go under. You then would hustle down to the bank and withdraw all of your money. Now, banks only have to keep about 10% of their deposits in cash. And so very quickly, the bank is going to run out of cash, and the bank is going to go bankrupt. The bank is going to have to close. In 1932, the Republicans will nominate Herbert Hoover for a second term. To nominate anyone else would be a sign of failure. The Democrats are going to meet in Chicago, and they are going to nominate Franklin Roosevelt. Now, in a first, Roosevelt is going to send a telegram to the convention. Now, he is picked on a Wednesday, and he is going to ask the conventionaires to stay one more day. And he will fly into Chicago to accept the nomination. Now, this is the first candidate for president who accepts the nomination in front of the cabinet that nominated him. Roosevelt becomes the first speaker ever to fly to a convention. Now, as Roosevelt gave to the convention, he spoke these words. He said that he pledged to the delegates a new deal. And soon the New Deal became the slogan of the Democratic Party. Now, Roosevelt by this time had polio, and it takes him a long time to get to the podium. So as he is getting to the podium, his handlers suggested to the band that they play very peppy music. And they chose a song called Happy Days Are Here Again. And as the song was played, the crowd began to sing, and more people are getting more and more excited about Roosevelt. In 1932, the American people are going to sweep Roosevelt into the White House and sweep Democrats into Congress. The red states are Mr. Roosevelt. The blue states are Mr. Hoover. Now, this now becomes the greatest landslide election in the history of the United States. But in the next election, we're going to have a landslide that is even greater. You are elected in November, but you are not inaugurated until the 1st of March. This is what we call the lame duck time. The time between election and inauguration are going to see banks in Chicago begin to close down voluntarily, or they're going to go into what are called bank holidays. Now, today, if you write a check or use a credit card or a debit card on a Sunday, the people you use it are going to honor it because the next day the banks are going to open. What would happen if we don't know if the banks are ever going to open? Would they accept that credit card? Would they accept that check? Would they accept that debit card? On the day of the inauguration, Roosevelt is going to come before the microphones and in a short but rather powerful inaugural address, he's going to remind the American people that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. This particular video is of that speech. Well, that is the end of lesson 23. On Monday, we will start on 24. Now, Roosevelt has a multitude of things that he must do to solve the Great Depression. This will take us all next week.